Georgia law, they write, says the superintendent shall publicly commence the computation and canvassing of the returns, despite the perceived fraud, and report the fraud to the appropriate DA. Wow. Who is that DA? Fannie!
And if you ask a person for voter ID, of course you have to show voter ID. The only reason you wouldn't do because they want to cheat.
A judge in Georgia is now ordering the election to be certified. If you are at the county level, you're working in the election operations at the board, you find that the election is riddled with fraud, you say, you know, we're going to investigate this and not certify this just yet until we can investigate it a bit further. Nope, can't do that now. It's de facto certification. It's almost like the election has already been certified and it's not even happened yet. What is certification? What does it mean if you don't actually do any certifying at all? Well, let's see what the judge said. But this is what the report says that certifying elections is a required duty, and they're not allowed to refuse to finalize the results based on suspicions of miscounts or fraud. So you don't actually check. He rejected claims, the judge's name is McBurney, saying that Georgia law requires certification and there is no discretion to challenge it. So it's a pre-election certification before the election even happens. It's just ministerial. There really is no certifying happening at all. It's just stamp it. Votes come in, there's a final tally, that's the end of the game. Take it or leave it. Actually, you have to take it. You can't leave it. No matter what happens, it's being certified. Here's the final order. They say in this second lawsuit, Adams, the person who is now suing Fulton County, is a member of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections. She is seeking a judgment that her duties, including certification of the election results, are discretionary, and that as a superintendent, she's entitled to, quote, full access to what she identifies are election materials. Now, they had a bench trial in a couple of other cases, and by the way, just zooming out on this, we talked about a few of these Georgia lawsuits here, but there is a slew of them. There's like 7 or 8 of them that have been filed very rapidly, all suing the Georgia State Election Board and many other entities. Now, on October 1st, the court held a bench trial on their claims, and having considered the record, among with many other briefs that were filed, Georgia grants and denies in part the relief that is being pursued. The claim is brought. They say there is standing here, and let's talk about the controversy. Put in plain terms, here's the breakdown. They say the person suing is saying that it is proper for her as a co-election superintendent who has taken an oath. I swore an oath. My oath is to prevent any fraud, deceit, or abuse, to exercise discretion in certifying the election. A conclusion, which is, if correct, would allow her to refuse to certify if she believed the results to be incorrect or not sufficiently reliable to merit certification. And yet, plaintiff has been threatened with civil litigation and even talked about being referred for criminal prosecution if she does not auto-certify the election results, right? People are saying, you don't have a choice. You better certify that. So we fill it with a bunch of fake ballots and you catch it, tough. You have to certify it anyways. Outcomes which may be entirely appropriate if the superintendent's role in certifying the results is mandatory and she fails to do so, right? So we need to know, what do I do? Her demand for a declaration must be met so that she and others know their authority. So the judge breaks it down. Now, although the right to vote is fundamental, forming the bedrock of our democracy, he quotes a case, it is also clear that states are entitled to broad leeway in enacting reasonable legislation to make sure elections are conducted appropriately. It needs to be reasonable, even-handed legislation. However, the certainty of the electoral process that these laws have long brought to Georgia's voters has begun to unravel as key participants in the state's election management system have increasingly sought to impose their own rules and approaches that are either inconsistent or flatly contrary to the letter of these laws. This case is one of those instances, says the judge. Election superintendents play a central role in election management, says the judge. The importance of their position is matched by the scope of their authority. Here's what they do. They decide the sufficiency of nomination petitions, they publish notices, they select polling places, they equip polling places, they appoint poll workers, they do a bunch. In other words, superintendents and their staff are rule writers, they're personnel trainers, they're managers, they're logisticians, they're marketers, they're accountants. Much of what they do is left to their broad discretion, but not everything. Some things an election superintendent must do, and must do in either a certain way or by a certain time, and they have no discretion to do otherwise. So they can do a bunch of things like all this stuff, right? Review and certify election results in their jurisdiction. That's part of their responsibilities. And certification is one of those things. Now, after the polls close on the day of the election, Georgia law, they write, says the superintendent shall publicly commence the computation and canvassing of the returns. Now, the superintendent has the discretion to do this canvassing where she wishes and largely how she wishes, but do it she must. And when she is done, she shall tabulate the figures for the entire county, municipality, and sign, announce, and attest the same. So, right, that's the Georgia law. They're saying it says you shall publicly begin the computation, and when you're done, you shall tabulate the figures and attest the same. Now, in performing this computation, so they're saying so it's mandatory, right? They have to return a result. Now, in performing this computation, it says the superintendent must, in the language shall, must compare the returns with the number of voters in the precinct and the number of votes cast. This is not an optional task. Superintendent has a statutory obligation to do this cross-checking. And if there is a nonsensical result, like there's more votes than voters, then they must investigate the discrepancy. She's not free to ignore it. They also must see that the votes shown by each absentee ballot are also added to the return received for the precinct. So the superintendent is not free to ignore the ballots, although she may count them as she wishes. Again, discretion. And in the course of her canvassing, counting, investigating, if she discovers what appears to be fraud or systematic error, she must still count all the votes despite the perceived fraud and report the fraud to the appropriate DA. Wow. Who is that DA? Fannie! So, if you find fraud, give it to Fannie Willis, who is a fraud, finally, and commits frauds on her own people. Now, finally, no matter how many poll workers she appointed, what polling places she designated, what advertisements she posted, what training she gave, what color ink she used, all of which are discretionary acts of the superintendent, she shall certify her election not later than 5 p.m. That's what the law says. And there's nothing in the code nor any case that suggests otherwise. It says that she must certify, and she must do so by a time certain. There are no exceptions. While the superintendent must investigate concerns about miscounts and must report those concerns to a prosecutor if they persist, the existence of those concerns, if this person has doubts, if they have worries, we still don't cause delay or decline certification, so you're not actually certifying anything, right? You're just kind of processing the results. It's a misnomer of the word. That is simply not an option for this ministerial function in the superintendent's broader portfolios. This conclusion is not profound. Kind of is, because it means that the election is already valid, even though we haven't had it. It's already certified as valid. Like right now, in effect. Hasn't happened, but we cannot reach a different outcome other than the election was valid and certified. It says a discretionary act is one where you have discretions. Election superintendents in Georgia have a fixed obligation to certify election results. So when 2024 happens, comes and goes, and somebody says to you, yeah, but they certified it. You just say, well, they had no choice. It was like they were ordered to certify it. So if it was a free and fair election because a bunch of people at multiple counties investigated it and certified it, no, they didn't. There was no certifying happening at all, okay? The judge admits it's a ministerial function. So if it's riddled with fraud or whatever, it doesn't matter. You still have to approve it. And if there is fraud, all you have to do is just send it over to Fannie Willis, okay? And she'll investigate it. So it's all taken care of. Stop your complaining about it. What may confuse the issue for some superintendents is that so much of their role is indeed discretionary, but the existence of the discretion in some roles is not in all roles. And the determination of whether the action is discretionary or ministerial is made on a case-by-case basis. And so the issue here is certification, not the job. And so they have no option here but to confirm it. Now, plaintiff has good reason to seek out this clarity. She was threatened with legal proceedings. Democrats are like, we're going to sue the pants off of you, lady, if you even think about not certifying it. But this goes even deeper. They can be suspended if they fail to perform their duties. Is their duty, Judge, to certify a rigged election? Is that in the rules? Did the duties say that? Even prosecuted as a misdemeanor by Fannie if they don't certify. Plus, plaintiff has taken that oath, not only to prevent the fraud, but to perform their duties. And so any uncertainty about what Georgia says is of paramount importance. And so they're looking to their laws that support this effort. The court thus finds the issuance of a declaratory judgment is necessary here. So we're going to do that. An election superintendent role, the court now orders, is in certifying the results. And by the way, this is not really certifying anything, just to be clear. They're not like validating anything or checking anything. They can check and investigate it and report it, but then they just stamp it. Whatever comes through, right? If it's a conveyor belt and you have a bunch of bad products that come off, you kick them off the assembly line. Doesn't happen here. One county comes back with fraud, doesn't matter. Count it. It is ministerial, even though many other aspects of her position are discretionary, except that one thing that's very inconvenient for us. Regardless of the characterization of the role, this is mandatory. Do not have a decision to certify certify or not. So you just have to stamp it. Consequently, no election superintendent, none of them, may refuse to certify or abstain for certifying election results under any circumstance. See that? Just leave that right there. Under any circumstance. So if 10,000 ballots come in with Fannie Willis's Grey Goose all over them, totally valid. Let them come through. If in performing her responsibility, they find that there was a problem, let's see. In performing their responsibility to inspect all of these things, it says the conduct of the primaries may be honestly, efficiently conducted. A superintendent, if they determine the need for election information from someone else, it should be provided. All right. Now, in 1946, the voters of Georgia elected Eugene as their governor. He died before he could take office. 3 men vied for the new position, and stuff happened. Someone brought a lawsuit, and it came up. Now, that hypothetical case in that claim has arrived. If election superintendents were, as plaintiff urges, free to play investigator, prosecutor, jury, and judge, and so on, because of a unilateral determination of error or fraud, refused to certify, Georgia voters would be silenced. Voters might be silenced if they're defrauded. You understand that? If there's a fraud that occurs and an illegitimate candidate wins, everybody who voted in that election got defrauded, right? Because it was illegitimate. The wrong candidate got it. So enabling fraud is also defrauding voters. Our Constitution and our election code do not allow for that to happen. And so the certifiers of elections are not certifiers at all. It's already been certified by Judge Robert McBurney. Georgia's election is already amazing. And also, if you have any problems with their elections, just report it to Fannie Willis, and she'll make sure she thoroughly investigates it as soon as she's done indicting Nathan Wade in a hotel in Belize. Here's Trump talking about how the Democrats just try to rig everything. They don't even want you to have ID in California. Why is that?
How about this? Gavin Newsom, he's the governor of California.
Newsom.
He signed Newsom, I call him. Yeah. No, he corrected me. He corrected me. I said, that's the first time I've been corrected.
There are CEOs out here. If they said those sort of things about a rival CEO, they'd be sacked. Do you think it's fine for a president?
But they don't have to survive like me. They don't have to go through what I have to go through. There's never been a president that's been treated like me, so I have to fight my own way.
You made a very good job of...
He signed a bill in California 2 days ago that you don't even have the right to ask a person for voter ID. And if you ask a person for voter ID, of course you have to show voter ID. The only reason you wouldn't do, because they want to cheat. The bill says you cannot, it's against the law for you to ask a person, may I please see your voter ID when he votes? What is our country coming to?
And that's what they want. Structural changes so that they have a benefit. They want tons of unvalidated people to get ballots and to shove them back in favor of the Democrats. That's why they are fighting so hard against any election integrity efforts by the Republicans. And now in Georgia, it's already certified. So congratulations. Your election's already perfect. Hasn't even happened yet, but it's going to be perfect. And every single person at the county level will certify it, or else maybe they'll be prosecuted for trying to run a fair election. That's Georgia. That's Fannyland.